Well, we have three different things kind of going on this morning, which I hope to help bring together in our next few moments together today. We're in the middle of a study of the book of Nehemiah. That's one of them. We're also, as a congregation, in the middle of this year-long consultation process, and that's relevant to what we're doing here this morning. And today is also a day when we're honoring our graduates. And we want to talk especially about that part of a life's journey, about coming to a change in life, a time when we're especially looking ahead at the road and thinking about, okay, what do I need to think about when I look at the road ahead and as I chart my course, which is really relevant to any of us at any time in our lives, but especially when we're making a move from one course, not one course, from one training course is what I mean, one, whether it's high school, college, whatever, making that kind of a transition in our life. We're especially tuned in to what's next, what are our plans. Want to make wise decisions about our future. And I think if you listen carefully, I think all three of those things will come together here this morning. I want to start just reminding us briefly the context where we are in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was cupbearer for a king in Persia. Nehemiah was Jewish. He had never lived in his homeland. His forefathers had been taken captive. His forefathers, way back 140 years earlier, the capital city of his homeland, Jerusalem, had been conquered, had been destroyed. His forefathers had been carried away captive into Babylon. Babylon now was being run by the Medes and the Persians, and so here 140 years later is Nehemiah, of Jewish heritage, living in a foreign land, serving as cupbearer to the king. He gets news that conditions back in his homeland, although some people have returned there in the time since it was destroyed, some rebuilding has been started, but on the whole, his homeland, though he never lived there, the land of his fathers, his forefathers, lies in ruins. The city is in ruins. The gates are in ruins. There had been a group go back under the leadership of Ezra. You might recognize that name also from the Old Testament. And the temple had been rebuilt on a much smaller scale, but on the whole, there was still great discouragement. As Nehemiah looked at it, it was not just discouragement, but to look at this city that once was representing God's people and God's faithfulness to them and God's deliverance of them. This city in ruins was a disgrace to the God that they served in Nehemiah's mind, and something needed to be done about that. And so Nehemiah, the first thing he did was he prayed. He sought help from God, and God led him to seek help from the king. And I want to suggest that's really could be our first lesson this morning, even as we're thinking about a church and making decisions about our future, or whether we're talking about graduates and making decisions about their future, is to seek help. None of us are intended to do this by ourselves. To seek help, yes, first and foremost from God, to always be prayerful as we are discerning and making decisions about our future. But to let God then lead us in who else we might seek help from. Scripture says there's wisdom in the multitude of counselors. As we surround ourselves with people who can give wise counsel, and we look to them, whether they're family members or teachers or other people that we've encountered, it is a wise thing to do. It's good for us to seek counsel from other people, to seek help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom to seek help, to gather wisdom from others, to let them pour into our lives, to let them look at circumstances and make suggestions to us. That's a source of strength, and I encourage you to follow Nehemiah's example for your life individually, even as we do that as a church, to seek wisdom from God and to let God lead us as to who else to seek wisdom from. In God's leadership, Nehemiah went to the king, asked for permission to go back to his homeland to help rebuild. Not only that, but he asked for help. He asked for materials and safety and letters of permission and all those things, and the king granted his request. But we also recognize, as we saw last week, that this task, the needs throughout the whole city were far bigger than could be done, certainly by one person or even by everybody all at once. And so last week we talked about something called priorities, and how that Nehemiah had in his mind where to start. But once he got back to Jerusalem, he took a little time. He was there for 3 days, didn't say a word to anyone about why he was there. And after 3 days, he snuck out at night and toured the city, looked around the walls, surveyed the damage, and some parts were so broken down and filled with rubble that his horse couldn't even get through. But he did his research, he did his assessment, and he established some priorities. Now, we understood last week, we related that to this consultation process we're engaged in, and that's exactly what we've done. We're not a city in ruins. We understand that. But there's some principles here that relate to us in various areas of our lives. And certainly as a church, as we prayed and we discerned, and God led us to an organization that we've sought help from, and they've come alongside of us, and we've kind of assessed where we are. And we began to see where we feel together, what our priorities of where we would like to go. And you've all been part of that. Even so with Nehemiah. He couldn't do everything. And we as a church, we could come up with, and we did come up with probably dozens of different ideas of what maybe we could or should do as a church. But we've got to focus in, and we've got to identify our priorities. And Nehemiah did that. And he discerned the priority, the starting place is we've got to rebuild the wall. And so when he went to the people there in Jerusalem, when he went to the officials, he didn't say just, we've got to fix all of this. He said, we've got to rebuild our wall. And here's how God has been involved in this. Let me tell you the story of how God has guided me and provided for us already. God is on our side. God is with us. Let's rebuild the wall. And the people were persuaded. They said, yes, this is a good thing. Let's do it. And they began the work. So I've talked about Nehemiah. I've talked about as a church, but as individuals, it really is important too at any stage in life, but especially when we're at a transition point and looking at our future and saying, which direction am I going to head? Which path am I going to take? Is to take some time to reflect on priorities. What is most important in life? Because if we don't do that, life has a way of just taking us like a boat adrift in the sea, and the winds will just blow us this way and that. Remember the illustration if you were here last week, and if you weren't, I brought it along. What we learned last week is that these two jars have the same size, that the contents are identical, as best I could make it happen, okay? And you see the difference here. There are big stones in this one, just like there are in this one. The difference is, in this one, we started with the sand, which represents the things that aren't really important. And then we put some colored gravel in, which is the things that are a little bit important. And then we tried to fit the rocks in, representing the things that are most important. And here, this biggest rock, there's no room for it. Same items in this jar, but we started with what was most important. We put the big rock in first, and then the smaller rocks, and then the gravel, and then the sand. And if you didn't see it, you wouldn't believe me that it's the same stuff. It's just a visual to help us realize the importance of ordering our lives with the priorities in first, and making other decisions around what's most important, not letting life just tell us, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to chase after that, only to find out at the end of a lifetime, I wish I'd done things differently. Because those things which were most important, I found I didn't have any time for. They didn't fit into my life because I'd already crowded in. I'd already stuffed my life full of things that now that I look at them really weren't that important at all. I want to give you a personal example. And this is not to say, hey, this is where I did it right or whatever. This was just a learning experience for me as a teenager. There's a verse in Scripture in Psalm 37:4 that says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desire." I've shared about this before, and we can read that. It's like, okay, if I delight in God, then he'll give me everything I want. Maybe. Understand what it means to delight in the Lord. That really means to put him first. It doesn't mean just to say words. Okay, God, I delight in you. All right, now where's all the stuff I want? No. To delight in the Lord is really to cultivate our hearts where God is at the center, where God is the highest priority. Kind of like what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. Seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. These other things, food, clothing, these other things, God will provide. Those will fit in. But you put God first. You have your priority in the right place. And as I was a young teenager, I was starting to find some real success in basketball and in my small school in West Virginia. And to make a long story short, that was becoming the priority around which the other things in my life were being fit. I was already, going into my 7th grade year, would likely be playing on the 8th grade team along with some other classmates, and was just really excited about this new step up in basketball when all of a sudden my parents announced we were 4 weeks before the start of school that we were going to go visit another church. Dad had a Sunday off, and we visited that church. It happened to be a church that had a Christian school, and before I knew it, the youngest 3 in our family were enrolled in that Christian school, and they didn't have a sports program. And all of a sudden, it seemed like my world was being turned upside down. And I share this just to say that God was working in me, and my attitude wasn't great. I went along with it grudgingly. I went along with it feeling like, okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to be happy. The thing that's really important to me is being taken away from me. But over the coming months, God began to work in my heart and show me things that were more important. I had already committed myself to Christ, but, it's a growing experience. It's a lifetime of growing and learning. And in the course of time at this particular school, God used different people in different circumstances and began to work on my heart where my desires changed. And I began to delight in the Lord in new ways and in deeper ways that kind of changed the balance so that those new desires were more important than basketball. And what was cool in that case is that God not only gave me new desires and deeper desires, but then he fit in some of the other desires that were less important. He still fit those in. And so here I am in this small school now in my 8th grade year, and they're starting a sports program. And here I'm an 8th grader in this small school starting varsity basketball, with the 12th graders. And I was a big fish in a small pond. I understand that. I went on to a small Bible college, and I didn't make the basketball team. I'm not that good. I wasn't then either, But you understand the principle of what God wants to do in our lives. Not only give us new and deeper desires that we recognize this is more important, but to still often make room for the other things in their place. And that's what we're talking about. But it all starts with having our priorities straight. We can think of just the recent example of all the storms and so forth. And I don't know what all was going on in the rooms of the people who were making decisions as to where the crews worked first. But I assume there are rooms like that. And there are people at computers, and there are people making those assignments. There are people, Joyce, you understand a little bit of that. There are people dispatching. As you get calls in, George understands, and working in heating and air conditioning, where do you send people first when you've got different competing needs? And it might be easy for some of us. We didn't lose electricity at all. but many of you did. We have lost it before, and it's easy for us to get tunnel vision and just think, okay, when am I going to get mine back? Whereas if we had the whole picture and understood maybe certain circumstances were more desperate, or maybe there are nursing homes, or there are senior adult facilities, there are other situations where people are less able to survive, to manage without electricity. If we had all the information, we would say, oh, absolutely, take them first. Even though it means some sacrifice for us. Now, we don't always think about that in the midst of a circumstance. All we think about is what we're having to give up, what we're sacrificing. When are they going to get mine back on? I want to suggest even in our own lives, in the life of a church, it can be similar in regard to we focus so much maybe on what is being sacrificed, and we don't catch a full vision for what's being gained. If we had the big picture and understood all the people who were being helped before us and their circumstances, we might absolutely say, yes, by all means, do them first. That's most important. Think about our lives. As a church, as we identify priorities, there may be some things that we say, well, we can't do these priorities and do this thing over here, so maybe we need to let this thing go. We say, oh no, but I loved that. But we see a bigger picture. We feel God calling us to something bigger. We need to understand in context, understand that sometimes priorities, establishing them and choosing them and ordering our lives by them, maybe we have to be willing to let go of some other things. Trusting that God will give them back in their place, maybe in a new form, in a different way than we anticipated. But as we seek Him first, as we order our lives around the priorities that God reveals, whether in our personal lives, whether in a church, we can trust Him for the rest. We can trust Him for our happiness as we're putting God first, as we're putting others first in our lives individually in a church. Well, there's one more part to Nehemiah's story that I want to touch on briefly and say, well, we're about out of time. I know, and it's pretty short. And that's just to be reminded that even when we get our priorities straight and our plans following our priorities, that it's not smooth sailing after that. Life will have challenges. There will be challenges. There will be trouble. There will be opposition in different ways. Nehemiah faced that. The people rebuilding the walls faced that. There was this man named Sanballat and Tobias, another man, and they were some other officials in some of the neighboring, I'd say towns, some of the neighboring areas who weren't very excited about Jerusalem being rebuilt. Maybe they were profiting from the disaster. Imagine anybody doing that. And initially we read they weren't happy about it. Then as things kept going on, they came in and they'd ridicule, and the work still continued, and they threatened. And things got to the point where they were mobilizing. They were going to come in. They were actually going to come and fight to try to keep this project from moving forward, the rebuilding of the walls. But here's what we can learn from Nehemiah and from the people in Jerusalem, even in facing those challenges. First of all, they were eager to do God's will once it became clear to them. Once Nehemiah proposed this challenge, this task, and explained how God had guided, they were eager, they got on board, they said, yes, we want to do what God has given us to do. Secondly, we read that they were wholeheartedly committed to the task. You read part of that, where it said that the walls reached half their height because the people were working with all their heart. We can learn from that as well. And I encourage, as a congregation, I encourage us as individuals, our graduates, take the time to discern, to listen to God, and when it becomes clear, desire His will more than anything, and then give ourselves wholeheartedly to what God shows us, the task, the path that He gives us, in spite of the challenges, in spite of the opposition. And then the third area, and this is what I want us to especially see today, is when the opposition, when the challenges got so great, when Sanballat and Tobias and the others around them threatened to come and to fight against them. You know what it says the people did? It says, but the people of Jerusalem prayed to God and posted a guard night and day and night, to meet this threat. I think that's fascinating. They prayed to God and posted a guard. Don't you have to choose one or the other? No. They prayed to God and hid in their basement, in the corner, right? Fully trusting God, at the same time faithfully doing all that we know to do. They prayed to God, they posted a guard. The farmer who says, when I plow as though it all depends on me. When I pray as though it all depends on God. Because I can't do it without God. If I don't do it, it won't get done. You understand? If the farmer doesn't prepare his field and plant the crop, there will be no crop if he doesn't plant the seeds. But he can do all that, and he's still dependent upon God's provision of rain and the weather and all of that. So I prayed to God and posted a guard. The song we sang earlier, one of Sherry's new favorites. Guide my feet while I run this race. Do you see both sides in that? It doesn't say guide my feet while I sit here and wait for you to do everything for me. It says guide my feet while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. God, I'm going to do what I know to do, but I need you. I'm dependent upon you because apart from you, I can't do it. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Joyce read from Proverbs 3. These were the scriptures that spoke most deeply to me as I was approaching my own high school graduation. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. Put God first, and he will direct your paths. He will make your paths straight. And I remember hearing someone teach on that passage and saying, it doesn't say abandon your own understanding. It doesn't say don't apply your mind, don't try to figure it out, don't ask other people for help. It doesn't say any of that. It just says don't lean on your own understanding. Trust in God. Do what you know to do, but recognize your dependence on him. They had their priorities straight. They sought God. They sought help where they could. Challenges came as they will. They had the confidence that God had called them. They had the confidence to work, the passion to work wholeheartedly in the task that God had given them. But when challenges came, they prayed to the God. They posted a guard. Fully trusting in God, faithfully doing all that they could. Good words for a church. Good words for its people. Good words for graduates. And let's take them to heart.